Hey everybody, welcome back. We're still rocking here at Gettysburg 158, commemorating what happened here at the time, having a little fun while we go, and also being reverent about, all the tragedy that happened here. I'm Garry Adelman. We got Kris White behind the camera there, and we've got a bevy of special guests that you've been seeing already. And this is sort of part two of our July 3rd, our Pickett's Charge coverage, if that's what you want to call it, here at Gettysburg. And if you watched the last video, and I hope you did, or that you will after this, what we sort of did is set up the Longstreet assault, Pickett's Charge. So we put the divisions in line sort of with Pickett's and Pettigrew's and Trimble's soldiers over there. And Wayne Motts spun the tale and talked about some of the men in Pickett's division, and then they were just about to step off. And what I'll say from the Union perspective, we're on Cemetery Ridge at the third day of the battle, sometimes known as the climax of the battle. A great moan goes up from the Union line because it was beautiful, like a parade ground, when the Union saw 12,000 Confederate soldiers emerge from the trees in the distance and from the sort of hidden ridges off in the distance there. And they seem to be conglomerating on this point. And to talk about some of this, let me bring on my good friend, President and CEO of the Gettysburg Foundation, Wayne Motts, who also happens to know a lot about Pickett's Charge.
Thanks, Garry. I appreciate it. So once we left, everybody, we left the Confederates lined up in that tree line over here behind me, 12,500 men. It's 1 o'clock on the afternoon of July 3rd, and there is a 2-hour cannonade that shakes the entire earth where we're standing. Think about it. 150 Confederate guns, roughly, let's say 80 to 90 Union guns returning that fire, and for 2 hours, one of the heaviest cannonades in the history of the American Civil War. Then at about 3 o'clock on July 3rd, when that cannonade sort of sputters out, the Confederates lined up over here behind me in perfect parade line. Now there's parts of 4 Confederate divisions that'll be in this assault. So that's the division of George Edward Pickett, that's the most famous one that we always hear about, and the spearhead, James Johnson Pettigrew, which used to be Heath's division, Isaac Trimble, which used to be Pettigrew's division because he's been mortally wounded, and also Richard Heron Anderson that protects Pickett's right flank. So parts of 4 Confederate divisions at 3 o'clock on July 3rd, 1863, right here behind me, start marching towards Cemetery Ridge from Seminary Ridge. And when they're visible, as the light breeze starts to take out some smoke, the artillerist will zero in on these great Confederate targets, at least from their point of view, and that artillery will start taking out a portion of this Confederate line until it arrives at the Emmitsburg Road, about 200 yards from the stone wall that is directly behind me. The Union defenders right on the stone wall, and the moment the Confederates reach that fence line, the Union Army infantry soldiers will open up with a hailstorm of infantry fire, and of course the artillery will change to canister, these iron balls in tin cans, taking huge swaths of this line out until the troops get right up across where this wall is, and led by Lewis Armstead, a Virginian, part of Armstead's brigade, they will cross over this wall into the Union line, and the Union Army will come up and try to seal that off, Garry, and bring it right in there.
And that's incredible. This is one of the reasons the story of Pickett's Charge still resonates. I mean, here you have these Southerners far from home, and they're reaching the high water mark, so to speak. As they're fighting far north, this is the moment where it might happen, and there's Armistead leading his brigade over the actual stone wall. And if it feels like we're not giving enough attention to this, see we have to have 20 Pickett's Charge videos already on our site. Look at Gettysburg 154, 55, 56, and 57 to see more Gettysburg and Pickett's Charge stuff. But what I can't do, I try to picture this, and Wayne just painted the picture, but I'm going to bring on President and CEO, I keep confusing the two. I keep confusing my own boss. I'm probably in trouble. President of the American Battlefield Trust, David Duncan, who has a personal connection, you might know, to Armistead's brigade.
Thank you, Garry. And yes, you are in trouble, but not for that particularly. There's lots of other things. Yeah, Wayne just set up a beautiful scenario talking about 12,500 Confederates coming across this ground behind. In a previous video, we talked about my ancestor, my great-great-grandfather, John Thomas Sladen, who was a second lieutenant in the 57th Virginia in Armistead's brigade. And for me, with knowing that I have an ancestor in that regiment and that unit, I don't focus on the 12,500. I focus on the one. I try to imagine what his experience was like. Now, he was a second lieutenant, which meant that he was behind whatever company or number of companies were in front of him. There were sergeants, there were officers ahead, but he was back there to make sure that movement kept going forward. So I don't know if he got to the road behind. I don't know if he made it with Armistead up to the wall. There's no record of any of that. I do know that he survived. So I can imagine at 3 o'clock on a very hot day like today, he's walking across that road, the incredible fire coming at him. You have to believe that he saw men dropping all around him. And I'm always amazed at that impetus to keep moving forward until obviously they reached some point where it was beyond human endurance, and then somehow made his way back across that field. And with the 19th century conception of honor, I don't know if he turned his back and ran across that field, or if, as many of them did, they walked backwards so that they would never be wounded in the back. But I guess my point is too, is these places, obviously hallowed ground. This is what the American Battlefield Trust does. We save hallowed places like this that are so important to our country's history. I tell people I study history because I enjoy it, but I've worked in historic preservation, and specifically battlefield preservation, for the last 21 years because I believe fervently that places like this are so important to our country, and holding on to that knowledge, the appreciation for our history and the stories that happened here, that's just vital to what we do. So Garry, thank you for that.
Thank you for that, David. I mean, I'm jealous of your connection. And now we have our video intern, Annalise, behind the camera. We're going to put her to the test while we start walking. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. I'm Garry Adelman. We've got a bevy of guests on and off, and we have some special experiences coming up, as we always do, because you, the members of this organization, support our education and our video efforts. Please share this with your friends as you move around, as you see these videos being posted. Now, here we are walking along, one of the places at Gettysburg, Wayne, where it seemed like everybody just wanted their monument. Were there really this many troops here?
Yes, there were a lot of troops here, Garry, and we're walking from the angle. We're heading north now, and the line of artillery that you see here, Arnold's Battery from Rhode Island, and we're just going to walk through. This will be the northern part of the Union defense for July 3rd, 1863. So we're going from John Gibbon's position for the 2nd Union Army Corps into Alexander Hayes's division as we move forward for the 2nd Union Army Corps as we go by here. And we're passing, of course, a number of these units that we talked about as we come up here to the 14th Connecticut. So right in front of us, off to the left, we'll have more Confederate troops that'll be to the left of Pickett in this assault. Now,
am I correct, Wayne? We want to say a word or two about the 14th Connecticut. Is this where they were positioned on July 3rd?
It is on July 3rd, 1863. And so the 14th Connecticut, under a man named Ellis, being positioned right along where the stone wall is. So these walls were here before the Battle of Gettysburg, and they're actually here to mark property lines. The soldiers a lot of times added to them, but we want to make sure everybody understands these are great defensive positions for the troops to be here for July 3rd, 1863.
And I wish I could remember his name, but one time, and you should do it yourself if you ever can, I was doing pension record research at the National Archives on somebody's behalf, and they had an ancestor in the 14th Connecticut, and all they had was a picture of his close-up of his face. It was all scratched up, and you couldn't really see it. But when I pulled the pension record, in there was a diagram that he had drawn, that he was behind that wall, and a Confederate shell came in, and it hit the wall and splattered rocks all across his face. It wasn't the picture that was scratched, it was his face that was so gnarled and whatnot. And I can't believe I've misplaced this pension record, but even if nameless, that's maybe the best we can do for him while we're out. Now, we want to get off the road. We don't want this to be Annalise's only filming experience here. So let's, yeah, there you go. You're on the edge there. And then let's bring on one of our best friends on video. And this is Dr. Cheryl Reardon, Gettysburg College and Gettysburg Foundation, head of the education committee there. Cheryl, here we are, and we have talked all about Pickett's charge, haven't we?
No. One of the things we always have to do when we're here is to make sure that you walk away with the complete story. And with all due deference to the Virginians of Pickett's division and their descendants, we do have to take a moment here and reach out to our watchers from Tennessee, from North Carolina, from Alabama, and from Mississippi, and give your moment in the sun as well. Today we're a little bit too literal about the place in the sun, but right now you deserve your moment as well. We have this massive attack called Pickett's Charge. At least that's the way history seems to remember it. But where did it get its name? The Richmond newspapers pretty much gave it its name. There were 5 of them during the war, and each one of them wanted you to read their newspaper. So when they had a chance to talk about Pickett's Virginia Division, the hometown boys, they went into overdrive, each one of them trying to outdo the other in order to raise subscription rates and all that. In the process, they either ignored or they criticized the other troops that were in the charge as a way to somehow either promote the image of the Virginia Division or to explain its dramatic losses. So here we are up on Alexander Hayes' part of the Union line. I heard Wayne telling you about Alexander Hayes, West Point grad, also went to Allegheny College, my alma mater. Shout out to all my Gator friends out there. When we're up here, we have 2 brigades of Union troops in the line, but the group that I'm kind of intrigued by today happens to be Willard's Brigade. Over this specific anniversary, you get to hear about Willard's Brigade on the 2nd day, down around the first Minnesota statue. That's usually your point of reference. But they're also back here in line to help repulse the second part of the attack under Pettigrew and Trimble, the other half, the forgotten half of Pickett's charge. A lot of times when we come here and we're talking about revisionist history, or some people accuse us of coming up with revisionist history, you talk about it like it's a bad thing. And revisionist history is no such, it's not a bad thing. Usually it comes because we have found new evidence. As historians, we are about evidence. History is an intellectual force that comes from the head. And sometimes we react to events in the past as something that comes more from the gut or from the heart, a family story, a personal tie. What we have to do, what we have an obligation to do as protectors of the American past, is to differentiate between the history and the memory. And that's a lot of why we come up here to talk about what happens when the Mississippians, the North Carolinians, the Tennesseans, and the Alabamians realize that they've been written out of the classic story of July 3rd, or they've been put into a secondary role, or the role of the real losers in this whole fight. They're going to fight back for many years in all different kinds of media trying to get their story told. But, well, what they're trying to do is this. As far as these friends of Pettigrew and Trimble are concerned, the story is the Virginians up here and everybody else down here. If we are historians, what we're trying to do is even the playing field and get everybody on the same plane and have one complete narrative that's all evidence-based. What usually happens in this case, however, is that instead of Virginians and everybody else, what Pettigrew's and Trimble's veterans and their friends will try to do is kind of just reverse it completely. And all of a sudden, now we have stories about this part of the charge that are disproportionately focused on them and ignore or downplay or criticize the Virginians. Among their greatest stories, of course, is that it was the men of Pettigrew especially that advanced farther to the front than the Virginians did. They will take advantage of the accident of the terrain up here, the angle in the wall, to point that even if the Confederates didn't get all the way up here to where we're standing, up where the road is on Cemetery Ridge, even if they didn't break the line, even if they didn't penetrate at all, and some of the Mississippians insist they did, they still advanced farther up Cemetery Ridge than any Virginian did, and that was a matter of pride in itself. And that's why North Carolina would ultimately adopt as one of its mottos that they were first at Bethel, farthest to the front at Gettysburg, and last at Appomattox. The North Carolina claim was based specifically on the alleged position of Captain J. Fletcher Satterfield of the 55th North Carolina, and where he was supposed to have fallen out here in the field in front of us. Now, how anybody was there to say, yeah, mark that spot, we might need that later. I'm not quite sure how they did that, but it's really hard 40 years later to figure out how they were going to craft that argument and make it stick in a way that would be, that historians, evidence-based historians would actually tolerate and accept. But it gives us plenty of things to talk about. But that's actually not why I'm up here today. I'm up here because I'm kind of interested in the Union defenders. Somewhere in the midst of all this, we lose the fact that this charge was repulsed, and somebody had to have repulsed it. So who did it? Well, up here I wanted to talk a little bit about one regiment that some of you are probably quite familiar with, the 39th New York Infantry. It's one of the regiments in Willard's Brigade. It's known better by its nickname, the Garibaldi Guards. The idea was back in 1861 to form a regiment in New York City with 10 companies, each company filled with immigrants or recent arrivals or just soldiers of fortune from various European nations. There was to be a Hungarian company and a Swiss company and a German company and an Italian company, and on down the lines. Now, as it actually turned out, there were far more Germans than anybody else, but it turned into quite a polyglot of a regiment with individuals who came from all over the world to be here. And they weren't just showing up to sign up in 1861. Many of them stayed in the ranks, and here 2 years later, they're still in the ranks. And some of them are going to do incredibly important things here. They have such intriguing names that I did bring a cheat sheet for some of this. But here, somewhere along the wall, when the 11th Mississippi gets very close to breaking through the line, or at least wants to claim they did, it was First Sergeant Ferdinando Malgee, born in Italy, who was going to capture the 11th Mississippi's flag. And another Mississippi flag was captured along this line by Private Francisco Navarrete, who was born in Spain. We have Italy, we have Portugal, we have Spain. We have an awful lot of countries that take us well beyond the Germans and the Irish when it comes to talking about this place as a gathering place for the world. But I think one of the things that intrigues me most is that by the 1860s, there was already a global economy. There was already international trade. Sailors from all over the world had seen great vistas far away from their home countries, and some of them found their way to the United States and decided to put down roots here. Down where you just were, down around the angle, there were at least two American soldiers, two Union soldiers, who were born in Australia and somehow found their way here. Both of them were sailors, and so we at least know how they got here. But I think what intrigues me most about our men of the Garibaldi Guard is that there are a number of sailors who add an element to our Gettysburg discussion that we really haven't included before. Let me share their names with you. Jose Samanieta. Where was he born? Argentina. Have we ever had an Argentinian in our Gettysburg discussion before? I don't remember one. What about Juan Gonzalez or Jose Arellano? Two more sailors, born in Chile, and they are here. Miguel Penate from Granada. Sergeant Joseph Fradas from Nicaragua. A lot of us around here, and when we're talking about history, talk about the 10 roads that come together here at Gettysburg. We've gotten a lot more comfortable recently saying that it seems like all roads lead to Gettysburg. We start asking visitors, what were the roads that brought you to Gettysburg? Well, now we're beginning to appreciate far more than we ever did before that many of the roads that lead soldiers to Gettysburg began at places halfway around the world. This is a place where we ask the world to come here and visit us. Guess what, folks? The world's already been here. And this is one of the places where I think about it a little bit more than other places.
Before we go, we got to keep moving, but I have one question for Carol, and only one question for Carol. First of all, that was awesome. As far as all of these people coming from all over the world, what are the chances that anybody watching has ever heard of any of that before?
I don't know, but that's why we're here, folks. That's why we're here.
Because I bet you, I'm going to wager that none of you have, because this is original research, and you can do this too. We don't have any sort of a monopoly on this. You can look at muster rolls and learn about this. Thanks so much, Carol. We'll be catching up with you more still. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We are covering Gettysburg 158 as we move north on Cemetery Ridge, talking mostly about the third day of the Battle of Gettysburg. We are about to show you some cool artifacts that were actually here on July 3rd, 1863. And what Carol was just doing was a few things. One, talking about the lesser known aspects of Pickett's charge. Two, talking about one of the units that was here, the 39th New York. That's the Garibaldi Guards. And they're in Willard's Brigade. And Willard had been killed on July 2nd, so there's a new commander, a guy named Eli Kim Cheryl. I think we're going to hear a little bit more about him as well. We were hearing about how the 39th and the 72nd Pennsylvania was actually helping to repel Pickett's charge charge. So, I mean, Wayne, do you think, if I may, bring him back, Wayne Motts, Gettysburg Foundation, you know, is Cheryl legitimate? Does Pickett, does Pettigrew and Trimble's part in the attack get sort of the short shrift?
It does get the short shrift, and that's because obviously it's not named after Pettigrew and Trimble. But if you look off over my left shoulder here, we know these Confederate soldiers in that first line, which is in Pettigrew's division, get right along where this stone wall is located, just off over here to our left. I mean, they get super, super close to where the Union line is. And some of these men in Pettigrew's division actually surrender closer to the Union line, steps from where the Union troops are here on July 3rd, 1863.
Cool, thanks, Wayne. And you know, one thing is, you know, in Pettigrew's division is a brigade under Joseph R. Davis, okay? And Davis is a nephew of the Confederate president, all sorts of talk about nepotism in the Confederate Congress at the time. And here is Davis. And we've already talked about Davis a little bit. We talked about them on the first day when they attacked with an understrength brigade. And one of the units attacking on that first day, and right here during Pickett's charge, is the 55th North Carolina. Let me bring on our friend again. Here's Ancestry Ann Mitchell, family historian for Ancestry Fold 3, who's been doing a lot of the work about how we know about some of the soldiers we're talking about. So your ancestor was here?
Yeah, for me, this is a personal spot, and I've never been here before. I had not one but two ancestors here. David Hamrick, third great-grandfather, and Maston Turner, third great-grandfather. They were in Company D. We know from the compiled service records that David was here. He was here, and he was shot. We know he was shot on July 3rd, and given what we know about the 55th North Carolina, it must have been here. This is where he was shot, in the right thigh. You really need to go and look at all these records and get all the details to make this story personal. And if you have that personal information and then you come to these places, you'll get chills. I have chills. My day is complete. This is so, so amazing. And because you all are American Battlefield Trust members, don't forget, Fold 3/Battlefields. You can get that 30% off, and you can go find your own soldier story, because I want you to know, not just that your ancestors fought here or wherever they fought, I want you to know what happened to them, because let me tell you, you come to these places, you get chills. But there are more chills ahead, I believe, because we are going to show you some more artifacts.
Good. I'm going to go ahead and call that the transition of the week. That I am jealous, and that was just excellent. More chills ahead here at Gettysburg 158. Thanks so much, Ann. So what we're going to do is happen upon some of these additional objects, and we've talked to Wayne Motts many times before, you know, about objects, but let's just say nobody's watched any of these videos. You know, we're on the battlefield, we have their stories, we have their ancestry. Why do we need the stuff?
You need the material culture, Gary, to make that connection. So walking out here on this battlefield ground, that's super important. But you also want to make sure you have these objects so you can make that personal connection that's here. So I just think preserving this stuff on all fronts is something we have to think about. Now, at the Gettysburg Foundation, remember, our main partner, the reason why we exist, is the Gettysburg National Military Park and the Eisenhower National Historic Site. It's the Gettysburg Foundation's mission to support them and to tell the significance of these two great places, the Gettysburg National Military Park and the Eisenhower National Historic Site. And you're walking on the resource right now that the Gettysburg Foundation helps the park preserve, including the Abraham Bryan Farm, owned by a free black man here, African American, during the time of the battle. This is the extreme left of Pettigrew's division for July 3rd, 1863, and the right of the Union line, Gary, to surrender right behind where this barn is.
And that's cool. We're going to let this car pass, and then we're going to cross here. But you're looking at the field of Pickett's charge in a way most people don't look at it. They look at it from where we started, maybe along the way, but here it is. You could see, you know, Pettigrew's and Trimble's troops coming across here. You could see a New York and an Ohio regiment going out to flank them. It must have been a terrible and magnificent spectacle here. Now, we are on North Cemetery Ridge. We're going to cross the road up here and actually get some shade, which is very nice. Hopefully not throw any shade as we go and meet with some of our friends from Ancestry and from the Gettysburg Foundation. This is Ziegler's Grove that we're coming up. That means we're sort of coming to crest West Cemetery Hill. You've already seen, I believe, some of our coverage about how Cemetery Hill was an actual battle position, and I don't know, Wayne, do you have any idea where Cemetery Ridge ends and where Cemetery Hill begins?
I don't think there's any good answer to that, Gary, and I think the soldiers didn't know where it is because they use the exchange all the time for Cemetery Hill and Cemetery Ridge. They basically use it interchangeably. So right over behind where Kris is with a camera, the National Cemetery course, and you can swing around, Kris, maybe we can take a look at it so you can see Cemetery Hill. Now that was an open field during the time of the battle. There were trees brought in there to landscape the National Cemetery, but what you need to know is the Union Army has a tremendous amount of artillery up along where the National Cemetery is today, right at the edge of Evergreen Cemetery, private cemetery, and they're firing right over our heads for July 3rd, 1863, where we're standing into this Confederate line, and the Union infantry, of course, all along this line where we're standing right here, Gary.
Good. Thanks, Wayne. And now we're going to hopefully bring some of this stuff together, literally and figuratively, because we've talked about the 72nd Pennsylvania. We've talked about Willard's Brigade a little bit and its commander, Eli Kim Cheryl. We've talked about the 14th Connecticut a little bit. So let's bring on and walk over to our friend, David Malgee. He's on the board of the Gettysburg Foundation, and you've already seen David had some incredible stuff, which he will, by the way, handle with or without gloves, as is his pleasure, because it's his. David.
All right. Thank you, Gary. So I have several artifacts relating to the defense here of Cemetery Ridge on the 3rd of July. First of all, I have some personal artifacts of Eli Kim Cheryl, who was Colonel of the 126th New York. As you may have already talked, he took over the brigade command when George Willard was lost half of his face to an artillery round late in the evening of on the evening of July 2nd. Did we tell the story, Gary? I wasn't there. The story of Cheryl being arrested.
No, we only talked about Cheryl being put in command of the brigade.
Okay. So Cheryl's a pretty cool guy. He's 50 years old here when he is mortally wounded at Gettysburg. Interesting guy, born in 1813, lived all over the state of New York, finally settled in Geneva, New York in 1860. He had served as a U.S. congressman for a year, one term. He also served as a New York State senator for a term. Well-loved, well-liked, well-respected, and thus he was put in command of the 126th New York, which was mustered into service in August of 1862. To everyone's misfortune in that unit, 3 weeks later, they were at Harper's Ferry on Maryland Heights when they were under gunfire of Confederate veterans. The 126th broke. They became the original Harper's Ferry Cowards. They were the unit that gave the name to the rest of the brigade. All four of the regiments in that brigade did surrender at Harper's Ferry, spent time at Camp Douglas in Chicago. At any rate, they came to Gettysburg with that stigma, being the Harper's Ferry Cowards. Cheryl himself led the unit 1,300 yards down the line on July 2nd in the charge that repulsed ultimately Barksdale's Mississippians, and then they fired in the flank of Wilcox's Alabamians, advancing against, as we all know, the 1st Minnesota that day. At the height of this, George Willard is killed. Cheryl takes over. He fulfills Willard's last command, which is to move the regiment back to their original position near the Bryan Farm, just to my left. General Hancock, who has ordered the troops down to that position, sees this movement. He goes ballistic. He rides over to the lead regiment, the 111th New York, and asks its colonel, who's in command, who ordered this withdrawal? And it turns out to be, of course, Eli Kim Cheryl. At which time Hancock not only removes him from command, but places him under arrest. Okay? Now, the next morning, General Hayes, Alexander Hayes, who's in command of the division, 3rd Division, will go to see Hancock with Clinton McDougal, the colonel of the 111th. They will plead Cheryl's case, arguing that he was simply following Willard's last order. Hancock will relent. He will put Cheryl back in charge of the 3rd Brigade of the 3rd Division of the 2nd Corps, and he will come over here and be in this position along this line when Pettigrew launches his part of Pickett's charge, and then during that repulse, Colonel Cheryl, who has luckily been put back in command, will take a bullet to the abdomen. He will be removed to the 11th Corps Field Hospital at the George Spangler Farm, and there he will die early on the morning of July 4th. There's an interesting footnote to this whole thing. Ann, do you have anything to add about Cheryl while we're...
Well, gosh, it's hard to keep up with you because you always know so much about all of this. But one thing that maybe you know this, but Mount Cheryl, the highest peak in the Catskill Mountains, was named in his honor.
Indeed.
You knew that, didn't you?
I did know that.
Of course you knew that.
Indeed I did. And his image is on the face of the 126 New York Monument, which is over here to my right. But what was very interesting is, after the battle, of course, General Hancock is wounded. He's recovering at his home near Philadelphia, and General Hayes will visit him. They'll have a conversation, and during that conversation, and this is a well-known story, General Hancock will say, kind of matter-of-factly, whatever happened to that colonel who I arrested at Gettysburg? I guess I should apologize. To which General Hayes will say, it's just like all your damned apologies, Hancock. It comes too late. Cheryl is dead. Now, Garry has asked me to bring some artifacts related to Colonel Cheryl, and they're very, very different because they're very personal. First of all, I have his camp slippers made of Moroccan leather, and which he wore, big feet it looks like, and this came right out of his baggage. That was returned after Gettysburg.
And guess what? David Duncan's going to put them on right here.
All right. I also have a combination of his gloves. We have his winter cotton gloves, and then we also have some doeskin gloves that he wore during the summer. I also have Cheryl's spurs that were returned to the family after the Battle of Gettysburg, and you know, they're just kind of standard spurs, but you can still see the rowel. They don't spin. But very cool that he might have been wearing these when he was killed.
They might have been here?
Absolutely, yes, of course.
Okay, can I just say I was correct? There are chills right now.
And hold on, before we move on, because I like that a lot. Kris, let me just guess. Kris knows something about spurs.
I worked on a horse farm to help put me through college. So if you're looking at the spurs, usually you would have heels here. This would actually go underneath your heel. This would go over top of the toe of your boot, slide it back on that way. So these are, as David pointed out, these are not going to spin. Some of them would actually spin. But a lot of officers wear spurs, some don't. John Sedgwick is famous for wearing his spurs. Camp slippers are very common. Remember, these guys camp as much as they are, much more than they fight. So the camp slippers would be something that you would want, especially during the winter time. And then the gloves would have a variety of uses, especially the white cotton gloves. These would be for dress parades, and other more fancy, the cotton gloves would be for those types of more formal marching. Think about the Grand Review in Washington, D.C. And then, of course, our doeskin gloves. These could be for your riding. And most of them at the time would also snap, either have a snap on it, or this one looks like it has an eye and a hook on it. So fantastic.
All right, then the last Cheryl artifact that came from his actually daily use is this message board that hung on the front of his tent. I actually have his marker flag that flew over the tent, but the messages could be left there, and then he could erase the messages with his sponge. So I mean, this was all returned to the family after Gettysburg.
So
didn't
that was a
Hancock have
modern, that's a whiteboard.
It is.
That's a historic whiteboard. Yeah.
And Hancock put something like "you stink" on there, right? Is that how it-
Yes.
No, and I actually am already getting the comments here. Hashtag put it on the fridge.
All right. So lastly, this is my own theory, but I've got to show it. The 126 New York was surrendered at Harper's Ferry in September of 1862. Their flag, which is only 3 weeks old, is now in the museum at Harper's Ferry. However, in Cheryl's baggage was this eagle finial, as well as these gold bullion tassels that hung off either a regimental or a state flag. It is my opinion that the only reason Cheryl would have anything like this is if they were taken from the flag at the surrender of Harper's Ferry, turned over to him as a sign of respect and also caretaking. Wow. So I just think that's really cool. A lot of people, historians, agree with my premise. All right, so moving on. You guys also were at the monument to the 72nd Pennsylvania.
And hold on, just wait. And I'm talking to you all, and I'm talking to everybody here. This, oh wow, it's flowers.
Let's hear it, boys and girls.
I'm telling you,
Oh, wow.
wait till you see this.
All right,
Chills, people,
so
chills.
what this is, and I don't have my notes anymore, but this is a soldier's memorial in honor of Charles Carpenter, who was in the 72nd Pennsylvania, Baxter's Zouaves. He was here at Gettysburg. He did come through the battle here unscathed. He was actually a 19-year-old salesman out of Philadelphia when he enlisted in the regiment. And what's so cool about this is it looks like a floral arrangement, which is fairly common during the post-war period. But what it is a floral arrangement made of Charles Carpenter's uniform. We have the satin lining of his jacket. We have his blue, the blue of his jacket. We have the red, which was the piping of his jacket, as well as the pants. We have his bell buttons off his uniform, his suspender tabs, his belt buckle, his corps and regimental badge, and finally, his wedding ring.
Oh my gosh.
I've been told by dealers that this is absolutely priceless, not necessarily from a monetary standpoint, but instead because they have never seen anything like this. It certainly shows a degree of love and respect for a soldier that defended the angle here at Gettysburg on July 3rd of 1863.
So do you think this was made by his wife, his mother, someone like that?
Well, I would like the ancestry people to tell me that, and because I have theorized it's either going to be probably his wife, his mother. I know he had a daughter as well. So who knows?
And a lot of times these would also include hair. Whenever you would actually create something like this, you wouldn't see the uniform, but you might get locks of hair that were from the soldier. We see that a lot of times, but I've never seen anything like this made out of the original uniform.
Oh, and his wife was Elizabeth Smith. Good luck finding her. And his parents were Henry Miller Carpenter and Mary Ann Marker. So just the fact that we can start to string all this together is amazing. And did you know later in life he fulfilled his surname and he was a actual carpenter? We found this in the census records. But
All right.
just
Thank you.
random facts.
Thank you for that added part of the story. And now I have one last, careful of that one, Gary. One last artifact, and this relates to Theodore Ellis of the 14th Connecticut. He was a major here commanding the regiment, which was a small regiment. They suffered huge casualties at Antietam, at Fredericksburg, at Chancellorsville, and he actually went from adjutant of the regiment to be the major in charge here at Gettysburg. And the story related to this artifact, this is his 1851 Colt Navy revolver. It still has bluing on it. This is the one artifact I should be probably handling with gloves, but I'm holding it by the wooden handle. This is the revolver he had at Gettysburg, according to his family, and this grouping came straight from his family. This is also the revolver that was said to be loaned to Sergeant Major William Hinks when he went out and captured the flag of the 14th Tennessee at the height of Pickett's charge. The story goes that the 14th Tennessee's flag was placed in the ground, surrounded by the dead and wounded of the color party. It was unattended, but 3 volunteers went forward from the 14th Connecticut, one being Sergeant William Hinks, who was actually from Buckport, Maine. That'll figure in the story a little bit later. So what happened was, Ellis noticed that Hinks did not have a sidearm other than his NCO sword, so he loaned him this revolver. Hinks went out, he captured the flag of the 14th Tennessee, thereby being awarded later the Medal of Honor. And he did so carrying this revolver, which makes it a very historic item. Now, being a collector, these things don't happen very often, but several years after I received the Ellis collection, I was at a show in Gettysburg, and I was talking to a dealer, and that dealer said, "Do you know by chance the name William Hinks?" Now, I've never seen this guy before or since. And I said, "Yes, I know about Hinks." He said, "Well, let me show you something that I have." And he showed me, and I immediately made an offer and was fortunate to receive
Oh my gosh.
this
my.
ribbon and medal, and the inscription on the back reads, "Presented to Sergeant Major William B. Hinks by the people of Buckport, Maine, for his gallantry at Gettysburg, July 3rd of 1863. That gives me goosebumps.
Can you turn that around?
Oh,
for
I
the
can.
camera real quick?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
Look at that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So somehow this all seems to tie together, and the story comes full circle. So.
David, thanks
Yes.
so much. This is unbelievable stuff. And yeah, here Kris is ready to talk about a gun. How much are
Yeah,
you do
surprise,
in 1
surprise.
minute? Yeah.
1 minute. So this is a blued gun. Bluing was actually used during the Civil War, but some colonels decided to make sure that the bluing would come off of guns, which is not a great idea because it'll actually make the care for it much easier. The 5th New Hampshire is a unit that carried Enfields but had to take their bluing off. You notice the cylinder. You can see that this has great etchings on it. You can also see that this cylinder has been used. This has been advanced many times. This is a cap and ball, meaning there's a percussion cap that would go on here and a round ball that would go inside of this cylinder. Just like you would think of a musket, you would need to load this with a ramrod. Your ramrod's right here. You would actually pull this back. This would drop down and advance the ramrod one by one as you advance the cylinder around and around. You notice over here there's a little indentation that makes it a little bit easier to put the very, very tiny percussion cap straps filled with a fulminated mercury on here. This is a single action revolver, meaning you have to pull it back and pull the trigger every time. Not like the ones you see in the Old West, which are double actions. Pull the trigger or pull back the hammer.
Hey, let me just say that I didn't, I want to stress again, Kris didn't know what we were bringing out. So if anybody ever accuses me of, ooh, how do you keep it all in your head? This is ridiculous what this guy has in his head. So just thought I'd say.
Just make it up as you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I ask David one question?
Yeah, I
here?
want everybody to come on briefly to say anything they want to say about this.
Okay, so for more newbie users like me, or newbie viewers like me, so we're looking at here and you talk about capturing the flag, and I know that this unit captured 5 flags and 200 men. Now I get the idea of capturing men. What is the significance of capturing a flag? Why is that important?
Well, the flag oftentimes was considered the heart of the regiment. Men would die to defend a flag. It was an honor to be in the color company. The unit, when maneuvering, would always guide on the colors. So it was very important, not only practically speaking, but also from the standpoint of the morale of the regiment. To lose a flag was a significant dishonor, much like losing an artillery piece in an artillery battery. So it's very, very important. So
capturing 5 flags, big deal.
Yeah, all along this line there were units that captured a lot of flags, and I think there were 3 Medal of Honor awardees in the 14th Connecticut. One of them being Sergeant Major William Hinks.
Yeah, and speaking of dishonor, one of the things that you would do with the Confederate flag, if you're Alexander Hayes, you grab a rebel flag and you ride up and down the line, dragging it behind your horse, and that is a way to show your men that look what we've done, but at the same way, it's dishonoring the enemy who's come across that wall.
And guess how they responded when he did that? Fredericksburg! Fredericksburg!
Go,
Kris,
David.
I think we should say, you've been filming all around it. We should mention this memorial. This is the memorial to Albert Wilson. It's actually to the Grand Army of the Republic, which is the Union Veterans Organization in the Civil War, founded in 1866. Albert Wilson, the last surviving Civil War veteran. And we now know for some research that he is the last documented Civil War veteran to survive from the American Civil War. He died in 1956, and he thought he was 109. He was really, from what research tells, 108 years old. But that's appropriate to be here. And for the viewers to walk this ground, get out here to the Gettysburg battlefield, thanks to preservation efforts, and walk the ground we're standing on and contemplate it and understand it.
That's great. What I want to say, for those of you, some of you are watching on Ancestry, or you're watching on Fold 3's channel. Some of you are watching on the Gettysburg Foundation channel. You might be watching on the Parks channel, or of course on the American Battlefield Trust channels. We want to say hello to you and thank you all for coming. I want to thank all of our guests, Wayne, Carol, David, Ann, Annalise and Kris behind the camera, and Kris in front of the camera. We also have another intern, Jeremy, with us as well. And Kris will just shake his head if we don't want to do this, but I'd like to do a moment of Zen and end on Eli Kim Cheryl's bas relief, if you will. Thanks for supporting battlefield preservation.